The
Yeah.
reason Jamie Dimon was like with Elizabeth Warren was like, we should ban all crypto. If I was the government, I would do that. That's because the commercial banks like JP Morgan want to be the entities issuing the dollar peg stable coins or the whatever stable coins or deposit tokens. And these same, a bank issued stable coin is still just as surveillable and programmable as like a hypothetical CBDC would be.
Well, stablecoins are just as programmable as CBDCs in every single way. Instead of trusting the government to, not restrict the spending conditions, you're trusting a private company, many of which aren't even domiciled in the United States, don't even have constitutional protections of free speech or whatever have you. And it's every bit as dangerous as the government having programmability over your money. It's just a private company.
There's a war being waged over the future of money, and most people don't even know what side they're on. For years, critics have warned us about the rise of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, government-issued programmable currencies that could be used to control spending, restrict dissent, and enforce surveillance at an unprecedented scale. But what if the real threat isn't coming from central banks at all? What if the war on financial freedom is being waged not just by governments, but by the very private institutions we've been led to believe are our allies in resisting state control? Few people have sounded the alarm more clearly than Whitney Webb, a respected investigative journalist known for exposing the dark connections between intelligence agencies, tech firms, and financial power brokers. Over a year ago, before the threat became this obvious, she warned that the real danger wouldn't come dressed like tyranny. It would come cloaked in convenience, through corporate-issued digital dollars that look nothing like CBDCs, but function almost identically. On the other end, Mark Goodwin, a writer and Bitcoin strategist who has been meticulously analyzing the slow erosion of financial sovereignty through backdoor digital tools. To him, it's not just about who issues the money, it's about who controls how that money moves, when it moves, and what you're allowed to do with it. Which brings us to the present, and the recently passed Genius Act. At first glance, it looks like a win for financial innovation. The act creates a formal regulatory framework for dollar-backed stablecoins. It sets reserve requirements, outlines who can issue them, and defines how these private companies must report their holdings. But dig deeper, and a troubling picture emerges. Under the guise of protecting consumers and modernizing payments, the U.S. government is deputizing private corporations to issue programmable, surveillable money, effectively outsourcing the powers of a CBDC to a network of compliant, profit-driven middlemen. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video, especially with anyone who still thinks the future of money is a simple battle between crypto and the state. The truth is far more complicated and far more dangerous. Thanks, and enjoy the video.
The reason Jamie Dimon was like with Elizabeth Warren was like, we should ban all crypto. If I was the government, I would do that. That's because the commercial banks like JP Morgan want to be the entities issuing the dollar peg stable coins or the whatever stable coins or deposit tokens. They want to take, the Tether crowd and Paolo and all of those guys, that they want to do it. They don't want these other companies to do it. And these same, a bank issued stablecoin is still just as surveillable and programmable as like a hypothetical CBDC would be. But this one-to-one reserve thing is a big problem for them because the bank's they want to keep their casino going. They need fractional reserve stuff to follow their existing business model. They have no intention of changing that. And it's, when you keep in mind too, that like in the States specifically, the central bank is owned by the Wall Street banks. Like they're going to direct, obviously, what the central bank policy will be with respect to digital dollars, right? So, there's a reason why I think the Fed has been so like unwilling to be like, yeah, we're going to do a CBDC. They've been very like, we don't know, we're not looking at it, and there's people that have taken that as a sign that like the Fed is fighting against CBDCs, right? But not so. It's just one that's issued by, the people that we definitely know steal from. It's just a different group of thieves in charge of like programming and surveilling. But they, are obviously going to collaborate with the government. It's going to be a public-private partnership. essentially. And I mean, Fed now, I mean, there might be an actual direct issue CBDC, but that'll probably be for like interbank settlement or something like
Right.
that. It's not going to be what
Which
like
is
the
exactly
public interacts with.
That interview with Whitney Webb may be over a year old, but if you've been paying attention to the current state of digital money regulation, you'll realize just how accurate and prophetic her analysis was. What she outlined back then is exactly what's materializing today. JP Morgan and the commercial banks don't want to kill crypto because it threatens the financial system. They want to dominate it. They want to replace open source innovation with their own programmable assets, backed by fractional reserves, governed by opaque algorithms, and issued through their existing banking infrastructure. Not to empower users, but to preserve their own leverage and control. And they've made incredible progress. Today, nearly every major financial institution is either exploring or actively launching its own stablecoin. JP Morgan already has JPM Coin, used for institutional payments. Visa and MasterCard are now working with Circle to integrate stablecoins into mainstream payment rails. Even Bank of America is preparing to launch its own digital dollar variant, while Morgan Stanley is reportedly looking to adopt stablecoins for settlement. This isn't about decentralization, it's about the consolidation of monetary power into the hands of firms that answer not to voters, but to shareholders. Under the banner of financial innovation, these corporations are building digital currencies with the same surveillance potential as CBDCs, but with far fewer restrictions on how that power is used. And now, thanks to the Genius Act, they have legal clarity and federal blessing to do it. To further unpack what this means for you, your money, your privacy, and your autonomy, we turn now to Mark Goodwin. In a recent interview, he laid out the hidden risks of this corporate-led stablecoin system, why it may be even more dangerous than a government CBDC, and how trusting private issuers with programmable money might be the biggest financial trap of the decade. Let's dive in with a simple explanation of what stablecoins are.
The idea, the name, it's very clever. These very important products that come into our lives usually have very clever names. And I think the stablecoin name is a very clever trick, because the idea of the stablecoin, the stability, comes from the fact that it is a tokenized representation of a real world asset, or of something that exists in reality, and here's a representation of it that's pegged 1-to-1. That's the stable. So there's a token on the blockchain and a bank dollar, and they are pegged together. So it's a 1-to-1 representation. And the idea of a stable coin is that, unlike Bitcoin, there's not these rapid fluctuations in value as you're exchanging the token. It's stable, right? That's the idea of the name. But of course, it's a very clever trick, because we all know that the purchasing power of a dollar is anything but stable and has been, routinely inflated away for a very long time now. And not only that, the general idea of the Fed debasing the dollar alongside the Treasury, of course, we have the idea of, well, if it's a tokenized representation on a blockchain and there's supposed to be this dollar in a bank, what if the bank goes under? What if the holder of the stablecoin issuer gets subpoenaed? Or, some other nasty fun thing that tends to happen in these wherever dollars are. Of course, there's a lot of risks that come when you have sort of a trusted peg in these systems. So stablecoins are basically the modern iteration of what we've seen for a really long time of private capital creation, which is to say that the majority of dollars are already digital. They've been digital for a long time. And the way that they're created is the Fed and the Treasury print these reserves, these securities, and they give them to private banks like a JP Morgan. And then JP Morgan actually creates the dollars in your checkings account. Right? They're not actually made by the government directly. They're selling these reserves, and the private banks make them. Stablecoins are the same thing. They obviously have some quirks and some things that we'll get into here. But the general idea is that it's just a digital asset that is pegged 1-to-1 with a real world asset. The vast majority of these are dollars. But of course, you can have stablecoins that are based on the price of gold. You could have stable coins on the price of oil. And you can have clever stable coins that aren't even, a 1-to-1, but there's some sort of algorithmic peg where they're trusting the market forces to, represent the purchasing power of a dollar through some other basket of currencies. Notably, we saw that with the Terra Luna explosion in 2022, where there was this algorithmic stablecoin that was backed by Bitcoin that was then popped and exploded, as I postulate in this piece, on purpose, in order to spurn regulation, which we are now seeing literally hit the president's desk today, the Genius Act, which of course, sets up the stablecoin industry. And the main way that it does it is putting rules and regulations into what can actually back these stablecoins. So, the what is going to basically happen here is that the government is going to tell stablecoin issuers that they have to hold U.S. government debt in order to print these dollar tokens. So instead of doing cool, fun things that one might be able to do with this technology, which has some fun use cases, instead of being able to create dollar instruments that don't touch government debt at all, the U.S. government is coming out and saying, if you want to call your thing a stablecoin, you want to put that dollar sign there, you better buy our debt first, buy our bags. So the Genius Act is quite genius in a way, in that it's forcing technologists to bite the bullet and buy the debt of the U.S. government at a very crucial time in which the U.S. government desperately needs more buyers of debt. So I'll wrap it up there, but that's basically, catches you up very quickly on what stablecoins are. And you'll hear them a lot. For the most part, whenever you hear the word stablecoin, you can just think a digital dollar that's represented on a blockchain.
At their core, stablecoins were supposed to be a solution. A simple, elegant tool to bring financial access to the billions trapped in broken monetary systems. For people living under regimes with double or triple-digit inflation in places like Argentina, Lebanon, Nigeria, or Turkey, the idea of holding a dollar-pegged asset on a phone instead of a bag of rapidly devaluing local currency isn't just innovative, it's essential, it's life-saving. As Mark Goodwin explains, what was once a liberating tool is being transformed into a control mechanism. Instead of helping citizens escape from central bank mismanagement, these new stablecoin regimes risk locking them into even more restrictive systems, just with the illusion of choice.
So what are we afraid of CBDs, right? We're afraid of them being programmable. We're afraid of them being seizable and surveillable. Those are kind of the three main things I would say we're sort of afraid of. From a programmability standpoint, I don't want the government saying I can't buy a tank of gas because I bought a steak yesterday and the steak has this much carbon output, and I can't buy a plane ticket because, I like running big computers. Whatever the aspect is, the programmability of the spending conditions of your money, you don't want the government to have control over that. I don't want them to be able to program and say, if I don't spend this money in overnight, it's going to disappear from my wallet, or I can't send it and I can't donate to a cause that's anti-government. Whatever the thing is, I don't want the government to be able to programmably restrict where I can spend my money. And that's part of the big transfer of the digitization of money, is that now the restrictions on your spending conditions aren't physical. It's not, I need a boat to send $1 billion of gold across, the ocean. It's now just, what can the program actualize? And so when you allow a central controller over the program to say you can't spend money here or this, or here are the conditions, the programmability becomes a really big issue. Well, stablecoins are just as programmable as CBDCs in every single way. Instead of trusting the government to, not restrict the spending conditions, you're trusting a private company, many of which aren't even domiciled in the United States, don't even have constitutional protections of free speech or whatever have you. And it's every bit as dangerous as the government having programmability over your money. It's just a private company. Maybe there are some good private companies out there. I'm sure they do exist. But it's not really an upgrade. And that concern still is there. And on the same level, if you can access the code as a centralized issuer to say, I'm restricting where you can spend it, well, then you can also just seize it. And so the seizability is the same thing. It's still programmability when the token is digital. So they can program it, they can seize it, And I think the third pillar, the surveillability, and we can get a little bit nitty gritty here. I'll try to keep it brief and not bore anybody and put them to sleep talking about blockchains. But the surveillability of a private stablecoin on a public blockchain, which I'll explain, versus a CBDC is it's a little bit more nuanced, but I think it's really important. And I would really like, if you take one thing from this viewer, I hope it's this. And a CBDC, just like when you use a wire or some sort of traditional banking instrument to send money, you are very knowingly, unveiling your transactional history to a party. When you use a bank, if you're using Bank of America and you have a bank app and you're sending money to someone, you're revealing to your bank who you're spending money to and then to your receiver's bank. And there's a group of people, a closed group of people, but there's a group of people you are 100% exposing your transactional history to. It's just a necessity for updating a ledger, right? That expresses the volatility between these two parties. Blockchain, it's a very confusing, a lot of people don't really grok the nuances of it, which is very understandable. It's kind of confusing on purpose. But you can really think of a blockchain as just a public distributed ledger. So rather than that ledger expressing the volatility between the two transacting parties being a closed circuit in a black box in Bank of America's server room or Wells Fargo's server room, it's now native to the internet, downloadable by anybody. And anybody that has access to the blockchain, which means anybody that has access to the internet, can now download the blockchain, which is just a string of ledgers strung together, very cleverly, cryptographically. But it means that every transaction that you make on a blockchain is viewable by anybody that has access to the internet. It's very hard to do anything private at all these days, but specifically trying to do some sort of communication where there's a handshake online is really hard because so many pieces of the infrastructure that we think of the internet as being this distributed, beautiful, open thing, but it's really not. It's a whole bunch of closed people that have, I'm your ISP here, that I can see everything, every bit going in and out of your system. Here's the ISP on the other side. They can see. We know damn well via the Snowden leaks and some other things that they are literally just taking data directly from the fiber optic cables, and they're reading everything coming in and out. As now we're getting the Starlink era and satellite internet, they're reading everything. And so a blockchain is really this kind of really clever way to create an opportunity for the world and really intelligence agencies to be able to get warrantless surveillance on everybody using stablecoins on public blockchains, because every transaction you make is published openly. It doesn't say, Mark Goodwin sends James Corbett, but it's a string of numbers, a couple dollars in a string of numbers. But if you are a intelligence level sized entity, which nowadays are increasingly more and more private, and in many ways have always been private, the intelligence community really was the information sector of the banking industry. But now we're seeing, with heuristic analysis, combining these data caches of IP addresses, of social network, I posted that I bought Bitcoin today on Twitter. Well, Palantir now has a database that says you bought Bitcoin that day and at this price. And you can really, at this very high level of computational analysis, really break down a lot of stuff that happens on these blockchains just through, pretty basic human behavior. So in reality, it's created an asymmetric advantage for intelligence level communities and industries to be able to analyze the blockchain without any need of getting a warrant and going to that Wells Fargo server room or that Bank of America server room that they would have needed to do 10 years ago. Now they can go right to the blockchain and they can find exactly the transaction and use heuristic analysis and find your wallet. It's really worse than CBDCs in this way, because rather than it just being the government, which is very bad, I'm not saying CBDCs are good, but publishing it in a closed box where you are willingly, knowingly giving your information to, 10 to 13 branches of government and law enforcement and respective people that would be in charge of a CBDC. Instead, you're actually publishing all of your transactional data to everybody in the world, right? So I would argue in many ways they are worse. They don't give you constitutional protections that might exist from a government issued currency, and they are published in a way that can be analyzed by very powerful computational groups, and there's no shortage of those these days. And let's be honest, these people that kind of built this industry, like a Peter Thiel, happens to run one of the biggest data bases in the entire world that's only growing and getting more powerful every day as it gets more and more data. Blockchains are really ripe for data because they are just literally an open ledger. It's the new iteration of the private public relationship that has been capital creation. And in many ways it's being sold to us as this convenient, wonderful thing, cheap fees, dollar access for everybody. But we're creating an environment in a petri dish right now for global mass surveillance for all of our financial transactions, and still the seizability and programmability at the behest of the public sector. So what's really the benefit here? What is so genius about this for the people? Oh no, it's actually a really good way to build a panopticon and buy Uncle Sam's bags and enrich all of the donor class that we have seen support Donald Trump's current administration.
Blockchain technology is revolutionary. At its core, it holds the promise of transparency, decentralization, and sovereignty, values that could redefine finance for the better. But like every powerful tool, it depends on who wields it. And today, those with the most influence over its direction are not idealistic developers or grassroots communities. They're multinational banks, legacy payment giants, and intelligence-linked firms, the very institutions that blockchain was meant to disrupt. Stablecoins should be a breakthrough, a digital lifeline for citizens in countries plagued by inflation, capital controls, or corrupt monetary regimes. And for many, they are. But under the surface, that lifeline is quietly being rerouted through corporate hands. When Bank of America, JP Morgan, and even Visa start launching or integrating stablecoins, we need to ask, whose stability are they protecting? The people's or the system's? What we're seeing is not an organic financial evolution, but a carefully coordinated handoff, from traditional monetary control to a privatized, programmable regime. While the public debates CBDCs, the real shift is happening behind closed doors. Stablecoins tied to regulated banks, surveilled by analytics firms, and governed by laws that offer little transparency to the user. The Genius Act didn't just create guardrails. It quietly established a framework for stablecoins to be absorbed into the existing power structure, with none of the public debate that CBDCs have sparked. This isn't a rejection of crypto, it's a call to defend its original mission. And in the comments, tell us what you think. Are stablecoins being hijacked to preserve the old system, or can they still be a tool for financial freedom if we act now? So if this video resonated with you, hit the like button, subscribe, and share it. Thanks for watching, or